What if I told you that a narrow strip of water only 33 kilometers wide quietly controls trillions of dollars in global power? What if the real battlefield of the 21st century is not fought with tanks or missiles, but with oil contracts, shipping lanes, and the currency printed in Washington? And what if the most important weapon in modern geopolitics is not a bomb, but a dollar? Most people look at conflicts in the Middle East and think they are about religion, politics, or regional rivalries. That is the surface. That is the movie playing on your screen while the real story unfolds behind the curtain, because what is actually at stake is control over the financial engine that runs the global economy. For nearly 50 years, the world has operated inside a system most people have never heard of, yet they interact with it every single day. It is called the petrodollar system. The concept is simple. Almost every country on Earth needs oil. Cars need it, planes need it, factories need it. Electricity grids depend on it, and for decades, almost all of that oil has been bought and sold using one currency, the US dollar. That means if a country wants to buy oil, it usually needs dollars first. And that small rule quietly forces the entire world to keep enormous reserves of American currency. Read that again. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is monetary architecture. It is how the global financial system was designed after the 1970s energy crisis. Imagine a neighborhood street food vendor who sells the most popular meal in town. But there is one catch. He only accepts one specific token. Everyone in the neighborhood must first go to the same shop to buy those tokens before they can eat. That token shop suddenly becomes the most powerful business on the street. That is exactly what is happening right now. Oil is the meal, the dollar is the token, and the United States controls the token printer. But here is where things get even more interesting. The physical pipeline that moves a massive portion of the world's oil runs through one extremely vulnerable location, a narrow waterway called the Strait of Hormuz. It sits between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. At its narrowest point, it is only about 33 kilometers wide. Yet every day, around 20% of the world's oil supply passes through that channel, 1 in every 5 barrels on Earth. That single choke point quietly connects the energy markets of Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Tankers carrying oil from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates must pass through it before reaching global markets, which means whoever can threaten that corridor holds an enormous pressure point over the global economy. And that is where the deeper game begins. Iran's military budget is far smaller than America's, not even close. But Iran has spent years investing in asymmetric warfare. That means cheaper tools that create expensive problems for powerful enemies. Drones, fast attack boats, coastal missiles, naval mines. These systems cost a fraction of traditional military forces, but can create chaos in tight waterways. In a narrow channel full of oil tankers, you do not need a massive navy. You only need the ability to create uncertainty. Insurance premiums spike, shipping slows, oil prices jump overnight, markets panic, and suddenly the entire world feels it. Because when oil prices rise, everything rises. Transportation, food, manufacturing, electricity, the cost of living everywhere, which means a small strip of water in the Persian Gulf can send shockwaves through cities thousands of miles away. And once you see that connection, you start to realize something important. This story is not just about military tension, it is about control over the financial bloodstream of the modern world. Because when energy, currency, and geography collide, power shifts, and the real game begins. Now let's talk about the math nobody on television explains. Because once you see the numbers, the entire system suddenly becomes obvious. The global economy consumes roughly 100 million barrels of oil every single day. That is the fuel running cars, airplanes, cargo ships, factories, power plants, and supply chains across the planet. Now take a conservative price, $70 per barrel, multiply it, 100 million barrels times $70. That equals $7 billion in oil transactions every day, every single day. Now stretch that across an entire year. $7 billion multiplied by 365 days equals more than $2.5 trillion flowing through the global oil market annually. 2.5 trillion. And remember something critical. Most of that trade happens in US dollars. That means governments and companies around the world constantly need massive reserves of dollars simply to buy energy. Central banks stockpile them. corporations borrow them. Traders settle contracts in them. The demand never stops because the energy demand never stops. Do the math. This is not just an energy market, it is a currency engine. When countries sell oil and receive dollars, those dollars rarely stay idle. Gulf sovereign wealth funds reinvest them. They buy U.S. Treasury bonds. They buy shares in American technology companies. They buy real estate in New York and London. They buy stakes in global infrastructure. The money leaves the United States when oil is purchased, then quietly returns through financial markets, a giant circular river of capital, trillions moving out, trillions flowing back in. Now imagine something interrupts that river. If a crisis slows oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz even temporarily, the impact multiplies instantly. Remember that 20% figure. 1 in every 5 barrels of global supply moves through that corridor. If even half of that flow gets disrupted, global markets suddenly lose roughly 10% of daily supply. 10% may not sound catastrophic, but oil markets operate on extremely tight margins between supply and demand. A small shortage can create huge price swings. If prices jump from $70 to $100 per barrel, the yearly oil market suddenly expands by more than $1 trillion in additional costs. That extra trillion does not magically appear. It comes from somewhere. Governments pay more for fuel imports, airlines raise ticket prices, trucking companies charge more for shipping, food becomes more expensive because transportation costs increase, electricity prices climb because power plants burn more expensive fuel. The entire global economy feels the shock. Let me give you a street analogy. Imagine your school cafeteria only receives one truck delivering lunch ingredients every morning. Now imagine that truck arrives late or half empty. Suddenly, the cafeteria cannot serve everyone. Prices go up, portions shrink, students start arguing. The entire lunch system breaks down because one delivery failed. That is exactly what is happening right now with global oil supply chains. The system works perfectly until one choke point falters. And the Strait of Hormuz is the most sensitive delivery route on Earth. Meanwhile, the strategic layer goes even deeper. Countries like China import massive amounts of Gulf oil to power their factories. Europe depends on those shipments to stabilize energy markets. India's fast-growing economy relies heavily on Gulf exports as well. When oil flows freely, global growth continues smoothly. When the flow slows, inflation spreads across continents. So let me make this simple. The modern geopolitical battlefield is no longer only tanks and soldiers. It is shipping routes, currency flows, and energy choke points. Whoever influences those systems influences the global economy itself. And that realization sets the stage for the next layer of this story. Because when energy, money, and power intersect, entire alliances start shifting. But here is the part that changes how you see the entire map. This strategy did not appear overnight. The pattern has played out before, again and again, across centuries of global power struggles. This is not new. The British Empire did the same thing in the 1800s. Back then, the most valuable resource was not oil. It was trade routes. Britain controlled the seas, especially narrow passages like the Suez Canal and the Strait of Malacca. Whoever controlled those routes controlled global commerce. Goods moved, money flowed, empires rose. When those routes were threatened, entire economies trembled. The details change, the century changes, the weapons change. But the pattern is always the same. Control the choke points, and you influence the world. Now fast forward to today. Oil replaces spices and silk. Tankers replace merchant ships. And the Strait of Hormuz replaces the colonial trade corridors of the past. But the strategic logic remains identical. A narrow passage becomes the pressure valve of global power. And this is where the domino chain begins. If tension in the Strait of Hormuz escalates, the first domino falls in the Persian Gulf. Oil shipments slow, prices spike immediately. The second domino falls in Asia. China, Japan, and South Korea rely heavily on Gulf energy imports. Their manufacturing sectors feel the shock first. Factories face rising fuel costs. Supply chains tighten. Industrial output slows. The third domino falls in Europe. Energy markets across the continent react instantly because oil prices influence natural gas and electricity costs. Inflation pressures rise again just as many European economies try to stabilize after years of economic turbulence. Then the chain continues across the Atlantic. higher global energy prices ripple into the United States. Transportation costs increase. Food prices creep upward. Financial markets react because investors know energy inflation can trigger interest rate shifts. Suddenly, a regional crisis becomes a global economic tremor. But there is another strategic layer unfolding quietly beneath all of this. Several countries have started experimenting with energy trades that bypass the dollar. Russia has explored selling oil using alternative currencies. China has expanded yuan-based energy contracts. Some emerging economies discuss building payment systems outside traditional Western banking networks. None of these efforts have replaced the dollar yet, not even close. The American currency still dominates global trade and central bank reserves. But even small shifts signal something important. Nations are testing the boundaries of the current financial system. Imagine a football match where one team has controlled the ball for most of the game. Suddenly, the other team begins experimenting with new formations. They have not scored yet, the scoreboard has not changed, but the strategy on the field is shifting. Coaches watch carefully because the next goal could change everything. That is exactly what is happening right now in global finance. Countries experiment, alliances adapt, systems evolve, and the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most sensitive pressure points on the board. Because whoever can threaten the energy arteries of the world gains leverage in negotiations that extend far beyond the battlefield. Let me make this simple. Geography creates choke points. Choke points create leverage, and leverage shapes the global balance of power. That is the strategic layer most headlines never explain. And understanding that pattern reveals something even bigger about the future of the world economy. Now bring the camera back to your life, your city, your wallet. Because this story is not just about geopolitics or shipping lanes on a map. It is about the invisible systems that quietly decide how expensive your daily life becomes. Think about the chain for a moment. Oil fuels trucks. Trucks move food. Food fills supermarkets. Oil powers factories. Factories produce the phones in your pocket and the laptops on your desk. Oil fuels planes that carry electronics, medicine, clothing, and machinery across continents. When oil prices jump, every link in that chain becomes more expensive. A disruption in a narrow strait thousands of kilometers away can quietly increase the price of groceries in your neighborhood. It can push up transportation costs. It can squeeze small businesses that rely on imported goods. It can even influence the value of your country's currency if energy imports become more expensive. Everything connects. And once you see that connection, the headlines start to make more sense. The naval patrols in the Persian Gulf. The diplomatic alliances between Washington and Gulf monarchies. The economic partnerships forming between Asian powers and energy exporters. These are not random political gestures. They are moves in a much larger strategic game. One side wants to protect the system that has dominated global finance for decades. The other side wants to test alternatives that reduce their dependence on it. Two sides, two visions, both already in motion. On one side, the existing order built around the dollar, global shipping security, and a financial system deeply connected to American markets. On the other side, a slowly forming network of countries experimenting with new trade routes, new currencies, and new payment systems designed to operate outside that structure. Neither system replaces the other overnight. Systems this large never move quickly, but pressure builds, experiments expand. And moments of crisis, especially around strategic choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, can accelerate changes that normally take decades. Because whenever energy, money, and geopolitics collide, the world pays attention. And that brings us back to the most important realization of all. This is not just about one region. It is not just about one country. This is about the structure of the global economy itself. The rules that determine how energy flows, how currencies circulate, and how power is distributed between nations. Understanding that structure changes how you see the news. A tanker incident is no longer just a shipping story. A currency agreement is no longer just a trade deal. Each event becomes a signal inside a much larger system. Two sides, two visions, both already in motion. And the ending is not written yet. In a world this complicated, the most powerful thing you can have is not a missile or a navy. It is understanding. Because once you understand how the system works, you stop reacting to headlines and start seeing the deeper patterns behind them. If this opened your eyes even slightly, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because conversations like this are how we make sense of a world that is changing faster than most people realize.